So in games, you can pretty much do anything, right? You can build new features pretty easily, especially if you have already an established world and an established core gameplay. But all of that, none of that comes free, right? All of that you pay cost in complexity. And at the end of the day, your players, they're not a homogeneous mass. Like they're not all the same person cloned a million times. Like they each have their own motivations, their own incentives for playing. They have all sorts of other pressures in their lives, money pressures and pressures on their time and their attention. So if World of Warcraft's been going for 20 years, right? And when it started, there was no TikTok, there was no, there wasn't even YouTube, right? And there were so many, there were so much fewer pressures on your attention when that started. So now you not only have to compete with other MMOs, which, to be fair, there really aren't that many MMOs that can compete with World of Warcraft, and there never were. Because as I was saying before, we're really in this network effects era where what you're trying to do is not come up with the most creative world or the nicest gameplay or the best feeling. I mean, those are all nice to have, but what you're trying to do is to kick off network effects to keep as many people in your product as possible.
Catalin, it's really good to have you on the podcast. I just want to say, as a big MMORPG fan, game economics and like the economists that actually make the game like function and like deciding how players get value, how they trade. I think in MMOs and beyond, I think is such an interesting thing to talk about because in a lot of ways, games are little societies. And when I saw your profile and what you do and all your talks and articles, I really wanted to get you on the show. So thank you so much for joining.
Yeah. Thank you for having me. Yeah, it's a big topic, but it's also one that is extremely fraught in that there are many ways to look at it. And I think the classic way is through the lens of monetization design or service design for live service games. And yeah, you mentioned MMOs, and MMOs are sort of the foundational place where most of the techniques that we use have been developed. And multi-user dungeons before that, which is where MMOs originated. And then there's just such a wealth of knowledge on that topic that has sort of been left behind. But this is I can just get into sort of how I started, how I got into it. And
please, yes.
Yeah, so I started out back in the industry back in 2005 or so. But I spent a few years in QA, and then afterwards I moved over to game design. And this was at Electronic Arts, and initially Gameloft, and then just so many other places later on, initially in Romania, and then in the UK, and then started a consultancy working with many global studios. So the idea was always to make games, figure out how they work, how to design them, how to provide a great experience for the player. But it's always games aren't really about games. Like making games isn't really about making games. It's about struggling with the technology and with the underlying kind of numbers to keep everything on an even keel. So very early on, it seemed to me that the business model and kind of the underlying technology were a little bit more important than necessarily the creative side, which is not ideal, but it's just sort of how it is. So I started reorienting in that direction. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. But you mentioned that game economics started really in MMOs. So was it like the online interactivity that pushed kind of the craft? Because maybe prior to kind of online games, it was very single player, of course. So there was maybe an economy, like when you were playing in like maybe a single player RPG, but I think it really came to fruition when you had lots of people playing together, right?
Yeah, of course. I mean, so I'm very much of the view that every game is an economy, or at least can be viewed as an economy, even the very, very simple ones, because at its core, games about trade-offs. And you have to make a decision that costs something and that benefits you in some way. So that is the quintessential kind of building block of an economy, because you have to plan a little bit, you have to calculate a little bit, what am I getting from this? And this is true even in Mario, where you're making a jump, right? It's, do I go after that coin that kind of takes me out a little bit out of my way, but then I might use that later? If I'm going for a higher score, then I need to go jump on that other platform that is out of the way to get that coin. Or do I try and save time? Like, am I going for the speed run, and then the resource that I'm managing is time over the coin, right? So even at that most basic level, there's still that calculation in the player's mind. So MMOs, to my mind, were even late to the game economy party. It was from the very start. This tic-tac-toe has an economy, right?
Really? Okay, because at the heart of it is incentive, right? So, like, why are you taking an action for what payout? Like, at the
Yeah.
core.
I mean, games, the study of games started somewhere in earnest. I mean, started somewhere in the 1920s with Huizinga and sociology, essentially. But games have been around before humans. Like, bees have games, like they play games. So even animals play. It's an activity that is very much at the core of being human. It's quintessential because it's how we simulate things in life without risking our lives, and without paying huge costs that we can't necessarily, that would affect our survival. So it's just such a quintessential activity. And economics is a quintessential kind of feature of human civilization and of human survival, because it's about resource allocation, and play is also about that. You, as young children, they learn how to hunt in hunter gatherer civilizations by playing, and by then you have to divvy up the proceeds of the hunt, right? And that's where economics comes in. So it's all kind of one big amalgamated kind of structure.
So it's like a deep human intuition, almost like a behavior that we have because we're hunter gatherers and we need to gather resources and manage them. So it's something that, like, we actually want to do intuitively as people.
Yeah.
So we see it through games
We're
as well.
hardwired. We're hardwired to do it. This is very much a part of our both the biology that we have, but also deeply socialized as well. There are basically no societies that don't have play. We all have every human society has play, and it's just an intrinsic part of who we are. And there is the whimsical side of it, and the creative, kind of the dreamy side of it, but there's also a very pragmatic reason for that, because it's a part of learning how to get along in society, and how to coexist with each other. Because when you basically want to avoid conflicts over resources, definitely at the very basic, human to human level, because it creates so much misery. So learning both how to acquire resources and how to divide them up fairly is a very pro-social right activity. And it's something that is that if it hadn't evolved, it wouldn't need to be invented, right?
Yeah,
And it also has been invented, so it's just both evolved and invented.
it's so fascinating because when I think back to how I played World of Warcraft when I was a teenager, maybe like when I was 12 years old, I
Yeah.
would spend all my gold. Like, I would just go to the auction house and I'd spend everything and I'd buy all this, and I'd never have money for spells, and I'd always be like, with
Well,
friends, we'd go into like
you're
the inn
the
and we'd be
opposite of
begging.
me, because I always hoard everything in games, all the power ups. I always reach the final boss with all of the power ups saved up, like all the resources. and not even for the boss, like not even for the. So yeah, this is what it teaches, right? This is why games exist, right? To sort of explore these behaviors.
And then it's obviously because it's psychological, every person's a little different. So when you're designing like an economy, like it's also not just the game, but the different types of people that play. And so like, I don't know, in UX design, you have personas, you have
Yeah.
people that have specific behaviors. Like how do you see that specifically, like when you're designing a game for different people?
So it's essentially where you should start. It's where we start. And it was not like this for a very long time. For a very long time, it was almost about the technology and about tradition. So, you have all these board games that go back thousands of years, and those were just sort of around, right? Like chess and Go, and well, chess doesn't go back thousands of years, but in its current incarnation, it's still a few hundred years. So those were just sort of around as a background social activity. But when computers came along, and eventually the internet, that's when it started being more about the technology and what can the technology support, right? Like what is our internet speed? What does that allow? Like what can computers display? Can they display graphics? Or initially it was just text in multi-user dungeons, and then it got more and more advanced to the point where we are today, with most people having broadband and being able to, stream amazing graphics, amazing visuals in MMOs, pretty much to hundreds of millions of people, right? So that's the point where it became about customization and about building games for certain audiences and knowing the audience really well, especially when the monetization potential started building. So that's when that became important. And yes, that is where we start. And it's I mean, you could call them personas. Personas are kind of an abstraction. It's more of a shortcut. But we start with looking at the different types of players. All these frameworks works started being invented around the 70s, 80s. Obviously, bottles, archetypes, player archetypes, which are kind of the foundational model for this. But since then, there's been a lot of research, and now there's player foundry, player types. There are kind of many, many more frameworks to look at um, at players, but it's still a very tech focused industry, and it's still very, very focused on what can we achieve in terms of visuals, what does the market need, and then like player needs are still sort of secondary to that. So yeah, there's a balance to be struck there always.
Yeah. And if I got this right, then it started with like in the 1920s, you had board games, maybe like even further behind, like chess, and then you had chess,
Oh,
Go,
you
and
you
then
had board games in like 10,000
and
years
still
ago.
still
You still
yeah
had board games. Yeah,
okay, so it goes for like, it's just, again, it's like very, very intuitive, but like just understand the scale for the audience. It's like
yeah,
board games, then it becomes like maybe single player games, and you start getting into online kind of online MMOs and online games, not to exclude all the adventure games. There's single games is like a generic
yeah.
term. And then you start getting into then mobile, and then I feel like mobile is where it kind of became more of a, how would you describe is games economics in mobile games? Because that to me is really when I worked in mobile games. Like I remember just
Yeah.
looking at spreadsheets, and like you were looking at, like there were ratios of how, like as you went up through levels, like it's all like a delicate balance. Could
Yeah,
you
yeah,
just
no, for sure. So mobile, what it really did is it opened it up. It opened up kind of MMOs and computer games to every single person, right? Almost. In that it made UX so much more accessible for computers, because they are still computers, but they're very, very easy to use because of the touchscreen. And it also made distribution essentially free, right? Because you could just download a game instantly. There's no friction, and it was all set up to get you in the game as soon as possible, and to essentially keep you playing with as little friction as possible. But so what that did for for games economies was it provided a massive audience from the start. It provided very, very cheap distribution, a very cheap promotion, because you had all these ad networks come along that essentially could give you users for a few cents. And if you could keep those users engaged over a longer period of time and keep them spending, essentially that arbitrage was incredibly attractive. You got so much more money than you spent acquiring that user, right? So that's the point where almost went into network effects rather than I mean, player psychology played a part, but let's be honest. There wasn't a team of psychologists kind of figuring out Flappy Bird or hyper casual games. Like they were incredibly cheap to develop. They were incredibly easy to market, and you just kind of stuck a prototype together in a month or two or three, and you promoted it, you put some money behind it, and you kept people moving in between those games. So there it was very much about distribution and about kind of the opportunity to do very cheap UA. So that's the biggest transformation that mobile brought about. But at the other end of that, you have your supercells and you have your sort of quality mobile experiences, and those were very, very well crafted, and they did lead with quality and with kind of player engagement in mind. But that's that's the other end of that.
Yeah, it's such a massive market. Like mobile is like, I mean, one of the reasons like games grew so much is like I always say, oh, the gaming industry is massive, but it's like, yeah, but mobile is like particularly like a huge behemoth in the industry. So I
Yeah,
always
but
found it.
there's no game industry. There are multiple industries that are all kind of been together, but it's like 4 or 5 industries. There's the console industry, there's PC, there's mobile, and there's kind of web. I guess you could argue, but yeah, it's all fragmented in many. Like it's all held together, kind of in this very, very strange conceptual framework of the game industry, but there's really not. Like it's just so different. You take a mobile studio and you get them to do a console game, like you will not get amazing results, and vice versa, because the business models are so different and the platforms are so different. So it's you mobile definitely grew the market, but it kind of ballooned, the mobile market ballooned, but that didn't bring in many new console players or many new PC players, because console players, like that's stable at about, I don't know, a few hundred million players. And it's always been stable for 25 years or so. It hasn't really grown. It's not growing. So, and mobile has stopped growing as well. So you have all these kind of silos, right? In the games industry. So yeah.
And it depends on I like how you said the business model, because like if you were to compare, let's compare like WoW to Candy Crush, right? Like
Yeah.
WoW, at the end of the day, when you're building an economy for WoW, you want I don't want to say this disparagingly towards mobile, but like there's a bit more of a purity because you're only interested in player like paying monthly. So if they're getting value out of the
Yeah.
game and they're enjoying the balance of the game and the economy of the game, then they're going to stick around. And then rather with a Candy Crush, it's more like, am I getting kind of that um, endorphin rush or that feel good from like, oh, getting to the next level and then maybe getting a power up, and then like there's a lot of reasons why, besides the fact that you can play Candy Crush 15 minutes on the tube or like
Yeah.
the Metro, and wow, you have to sit down and play for 7 hours and then you got to grind hard. But I just think the
Yeah.
business, does it all start from the business, kind of the business plan, like the monetization model, and then it kind of grows upwards, or just,
It should. Like in an ideal world, game developers would sit down and they would figure out they would pick the business model first. Like they would say, this is a free to play game, and it needs to have this type of engagement model, this type of engagement model. It needs to target this type of player personality, right? And that goes on to some extent, but it's surprisingly non-binding. Like, people will say, "All right, let's do a mobile shooter, and it's free to play." And then after it goes for like a year, the market changes, or some other opportunity pops up, some other publisher is interested, and then they'll shift platform, but not shift the business model, right? and it all gets sort of muddled together. So yeah, in an ideal world, yeah, people would sit down, like developers would sit down and they would go, okay, this is free to play. It needs to have a certain amount of content. It needs to be structured in this way. The engagement loop needs to be very short sessions, but quite, very high frequency, right? And it's structured in this way, but that very rarely happens. There are all these other pressures that get in the way, and it's all very influenced by what's currently successful in the market. Because if there's some other trendy game that pops up or trendy genre, everyone would try and run in that direction. It's happened so many times with, Battle Royale was the biggest one. Auto chess after that, which had a moment, and then they all started drying up. MOBAs, like everyone just runs for the thing that's currently making money, even when it clashes with their current business model. Even if they're like, oh yeah, we're doing a console shooter and it's premium, right? Well, let's add a battle pass and let's add cosmetics and let's load it up with microtransactions, and it works in the very short term, but then it undermines confidence in your product. It undermines your brand, which if you're a premium game, like your brand is very, very important, because that's the trust between you and the player. So you'll increase your revenue for, I don't know, like one or two product cycles, and then it all just falls off, and your kind of brand equity is exhausted, and it becomes perceived as this kind of cash grab, pay to win thing. And you then have to kind of go back to the drawing board or just abandon it completely. And yeah, there is very little alignment there, which is a bit tricky. So yeah, does that answer the question?
It does, and it feels it feels very true. B, it feels quite short sighted because you end up losing like your loyal player base. Like there are people that really love your game, and whenever you try to shift to a different model, um, it pushes the people that were going to play your game for a long time away, and then you have all these very temporary players that are there for the trend or are there for that month or for those 3 months or whatever it is, and then they move on to
Yeah.
the next thing, and it just creates so much pressure because like rather than building a stable boat that can rock the seas, you try to add an engine to just go as quickly as possible, then you crash against the wave. And I don't know if that's a good analogy, but it
Yeah,
just
no,
feels
it is. That's exactly it. Because like, so there are maybe so games have some usage models that the shorthand would be that mobile games are time wasters and MMOs are so you players play for a certain set of reasons, like a pretty narrow set of reasons. One, to waste time and distract themselves. Two, to be in a place, so to have a sense of place with a social circle, and that would be your MMOs and your Fortnites and like those live service games that are destinations for friends, for friend groups that get played for years and years and years. And they also play to have narrative experiences, um, sort of replacements for movies and books. Um, or they play to have kind of the thrill ride that just completely that is very intense, and it occupies their brain. And those are kind of the big four. I mean, obviously it's very simplified, but when one thing tries to be the other thing, it gets incredibly risky, and it's sort of a recipe for disappointment, both for the developer and for the audience. And one example of a developer that has actually done really well recently is Jagex. Like, you know, because you mentioned you worked on that team, and the way they have brought RuneScape back, and they've stripped back the monetization, and they've tried to regain their core audience. Like that is a very positive example of how you can come back from doing that. But most of the time, it's really not that cut and dry for most developers.
Yeah, and it's a risky move. I think, yeah, what Jagex said with RuneScape was fantastic. Like the CEO, John Bellamy, coming out saying, we want to kind of bring back RuneScape to its roots. It's
Yeah.
a really heavy monetization model. It's pushing away players. So it's hard to do. And in the sense that not a lot of other developers or companies, whatever, kind of take that stance. But I think it speaks a lot to the player first mentality that I always saw when I was working there. So yeah, I couldn't agree more. Um, how do you see like balancing an economy then? Because like you said, games are constantly fluctuating, right?
Yeah.
Let's say like a World of Warcraft expansion. It's going to evolve and it's going to change, and there are going to be new metas and new ways of making gold or new items that get traded. Like part of game economics, I imagine, on one hand is building the foundation to make sure that players can have fun, but then that foundation can get eroded or morph and change. So is it also like constantly observing the economy in action as it like ebbs and flows, and you need to make sure
Yeah.
to
Yeah.
tweak
Of
the
course.
right things?
So yeah, the thing that we as game designers or game economists kind of fight against constantly is hedonic adaptation. Like players, they and humans in general, when we're our brains are pattern matching and pattern kind of recognition machines, and we constantly collect data in our brain, and we analyze, and we build mental models of things that we see and we experience. And once we've understood those patterns, we look for new patterns. So that's essentially true in real life. That's true in games. So when you've had, there are play patterns that have been successful for many years, but even those need to be refreshed, at least with new content and with new yeah, the new meta is what you'd call it, but that's a constant battle. And some play patterns, they're so rich and they are so engaging that you can change just a little bit. You can add a new map to a shooter, to an arena shooter, and keep it fresh for a very long time, right? But beyond that, there is a complexity debt, and when you keep adding things, you keep changing things, at some point it just gets too unwieldy. And the way most games are structured, they have they're games of progression, essentially. Well, there are two types of games of progression and games of emergence. And live service games are very much games of progression, because that's what keeps you locked in for the long term. You want to keep accumulating, power, and to progress in the formal progression, like level up your battle pass, level up your character level, or accumulate skins, or whatever it is that the core economy is organized around. And the problem with that is, in order to make it feel satisfying, you have to give them power. So you have to constantly increase the power level of the player, and you have to keep giving them items, and that eventually becomes a problem, because they get too powerful, they have too many items, they have too much experience, and it also increases the complexity, because all of those things need to interact with each other. If you give them a new skill, you give them a new a new ability, or something else, that needs to interact with all the other abilities, all the other new enemies that you're introducing, all the other game elements. And the main takeaway is, it increases complexity and it increases power. And eventually the player gets to a point where they have so much power, they have so much money, that the game doesn't feel satisfying anymore. And they've also adapted to all of the things that you've thrown at them. And the solve has traditionally been to introduce new game elements that take more and more, that are more difficult to address, that to introduce more expensive items, that more kind of difficult enemies. But you also can't do that forever. Like at one point, you have to completely reset. You have to introduce completely new areas that kind of take you back to the start of that core loop, and they kind of strip you of things that you already have. that you've already earned, so you can earn them all over again. And another challenge around that is, how do you do that within the fiction of the game? How do you justify that they spend all this time accumulating all this stuff, and now you have to kind of take them back to zero, right? And how do you do that in a way that's not dissatisfying to you? And that's always been like in a game that's run for ages. And it has many expansions. Players are sort of inured to that. They've pretty much been trained for that. But for something that's not necessarily part of a big tradition, that's not necessarily a very successful MMO that's run for years and decades, maybe. That is a much harder challenge, right? And you don't really have the same resources as a big studio. So yeah, it's a different approach.
It's fascinating. When I spoke to Greg Street, he told me when they were doing like the first couple expansions in WoW, like even at the beginning, they didn't know the expansion model was a thing, right? Like they built classic WoW, and they're like, okay, we had all these ideas for other things to build. We ran out of time, so they got to the end of like after 2 years or 3 years of classic WoW. I can't remember how long. Vanilla WoW, apologies. They're like, okay, let's just make an expansion, and in a lot of ways, that's what you're talking about. Like the players keep progressing, and it's like, okay, how do we get them to go to level 70 now? And now, what are the new items they have to get? And how much more expensive are spells going to be? And like, it's not like you can't keep the price of things stable. They have to keep going up and up and up. And same thing with gear and like their stats and attributes. And it's interesting because then you can either get to the point like retail WoW where there's just so much stuff. And I think it's lost a lot of its casual audience because it just became like for the core. Like for the core PvPers or the core PvEers, which there is an audience there for retail WoW and is played by a lot of people, but it just lost a lot of that casual that ended up going back to classic. But I think all this to say that like it is something that people are just trying, like that whole stat squeeze, or like what happens when players accumulate too much or get to the end of a certain segment of the design of the economy. Like there are different strategies, and like I always think back, another example is Final Fantasy, when they just decided to reset the whole world and they just wiped everything and they just started over. That's always such an interesting story that Square Enix did that. So yeah, how do you see that model in games where you need to like just either reset or new expansion or keep them going indefinitely? Like it almost becomes slightly impossible to maintain the game forever.
Yeah, well, I mean that's exactly the thing. It is impossible impossible. It's so
Very
games
difficult.
it's difficult. So in games you can pretty much do anything, right? You can uh you can build new features pretty easily, especially if you have already an established world and an established core gameplay. But none of that comes free, right? All of that you pay cost in complexity. And at the end of the day, your players, they're not a homogeneous mass. Like they're not all the same person cloned a million times. Like they each have their own, their own motivations, their own incentives for playing. They have all sorts of other pressures in their lives, money pressures and pressures on their time and their attention. So if World of Warcraft's been going for 20 years, right? And when it started, there was no TikTok, there was no OnlyFans, there was no, there wasn't even YouTube, right? And there were so many, there were so much fewer pressures on your attention when that started. So now you not only have to compete with, with other MMOs, which, to be fair, there really aren't that many MMOs that can compete with World of Warcraft, and there never were. Because as I was saying before, we're really in this network effects era where what you're trying to do is not come up with the most creative world or the nicest gameplay or the best feeling. I mean, those are all nice to have, but what you're trying to do is to kick off network effects to keep as many people in your product as possible, right? And part of that is having a game that is very, very easy to customize, and that can, with sort of minimal tweaks, it can still feel fresh. And that's how these behemoths like, PUBG and Fortnite and, well, it's Roblox too, they kind of managed to amass these huge audiences. So it's, I mean, balancing is tricky, but it's not, it's a known quantity at this point, right? Like, yeah, you put everything into spreadsheets or, whatever, a data model, and you, figure out what their, power levels are, what their utility is to the player, and you try and figure that, balance that against the cost in in currency and the cost in time to acquire. I mean, time's more important if you're in a free to play economy. Because if you're paying a, subscription, then time is sort of, implied. Like you're paying for a month of time. You're probably not going to worry about, you know, having to get, to be time efficient, because you're there to spend time, essentially. But beyond that, like that's a pretty solved problem at this point. I mean, as long as you can keep, things fairly, you can keep players from accumulating too much currency, like you keep inflation from going out of whack, and you can keep instituting new sinks to, absorb all of that currency, then you're pretty much set. But the 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 real question is what happens over the longer term. Like, can something go for 20 years, 30 years, 40 years, 50 years, right? Or at this point, does the live ops become less effective over time, right? If you're starting to get huge chunks of your audience churning, then you really have to come in with something a lot different from what you had before, but also fairly consistent with what you had before, which is like, that's the real challenge. That's the real trick.
I love how you're saying all this because when I worked at Jagex, you have old school RuneScape and you have RuneScape, like RuneScape 3. And then in World of Warcraft, you have classic and you have retail. And to me, when I was looking at those two models and trying to understand, okay, at its simplest level, what does that mean? It's like, for instance, WoW Classic is about users spending their time to get progression.
Yeah.
And then retail is more about users spending their money to get progression because they value their time more than their money. And instead in classic, you value your money more than your time. Like in the sense that it's all about the beauty about classic WoW that I think a lot of people love is that you actually have to spend time progressing and journeying and putting in the time to grow your character. And whenever an MMO adds like a level boost, it just propels everyone to the level 60, which on one hand feels bad for the game because you're taking away the whole point of an MMO, which is you're putting in time to grow your character and you're investing. But on the other hand, it's also like, how do you get more people into the game without making them go through a dead experience? Because everyone now is pushed so far into the game that there's no one to play at the beginning. So it comes down to, I hope I'm explaining this well enough, but it is really between time and money. And then on top of the fact, add the idea that your grounded audience, so your 2010, even your 2004 audience, all those people became dads. And so then aren't teenagers anymore, aren't young adults. They now have families. They can't put in 9 hours a day. So obviously now they can only put in a couple hours, maybe on a weekend. And so they can't keep up with the pace of an MMO. So now, like monetization options like boosts and like being able to buy a mount and being able to get the things you want for your money is much more appealing because you no longer have that currency of time. So I don't know if that made sense, but to me, I love that split between the two, and it makes so much sense why two historic MMOs like old school, like RuneScape and Warcraft, both have that split because it speaks so much to the audience that like is still there, but kind of fundamentally divided.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you described it perfectly. That is the tension that you have to, like, network effects. They, as much as they are, valued and very desired and very sought after in a product, they are incredibly fragile, and it all depends on keeping this equilibrium between different parts of your audience. that is like, it's not a natural equilibrium. Like, if you have to build a game that is many things to many people, like, some part of your audience will be unsatisfied, and hopefully that's not the growing part of your audience. So I think you described it perfectly. I think it was, there's this perception when WoW Classic came out that, oh, they're cashing in on nostalgia. Well, they are, but it's not just that. I think it was a very, like, I don't want to put words in anyone's mouth, because obviously I'm not at Blizzard. I have friends at Blizzard, but I'm not, I've never been a part of the studio, so I don't really know if that's the case. But it seems to me to stand to reason that it solves a problem for them. Like, it siphons off their hardcore, want to spend time, players, and who had that experience when they started it, pun, and it keeps the rest of the game for, it just segments. It's a segmentation strategy. It's not,
Yeah.
it's not necessarily like any sort of cash grab or anything like that, or like, it's not a cynical thing. It's a pragmatic thing, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, for sure. But this is very much the problem with older games, and it's like they found a way to reinvent the product and to kind of silo all the different audiences into kind of their preferred experience. Um, I will say it's probably a short term, like, it's a stopgap, like, because at the end of the day, no matter what you do, some things will just end. Like, some experiences are very much of their time, and they will just not be viable in the future, like, no matter what you do. I'm not saying, it's the end of the road for World of Warcraft. Obviously, it's still doing really well. They have done a great job staving off the decline. But it will, at one point, just people will just not. They will have so many other options, so many other easy ways to occupy their attention, that it's conceivable that it will just start to peter out at one point.
Yeah, I mean they're working on Classic Plus, so I'm very. Well, I think everyone in the Classic WoW community is super excited about what Classic Plus will be. But Catalin, we haven't touched on one more thing, which is gold farming, botting. Like, there's this whole insane economy which I experienced at RuneScape, because and they've done really well, to be fair, to address it. And I was there. It's such a fascinating problem to deal with, because players want to spend money to get gold, and it's very hard to stop them from doing that. And when there is a need, there is going to be a market that satisfies that need, and it's very hard to stop. So I just wanted to get your take on how you see farming and botting in MMOs, and even in other games, but in general, it is, because then it ends up, like, just in my experience, it ends up pushing the company to create something like, in Blizzard's case, a WoW token, because they don't know how to fight off the very idea of people just selling their gold directly in game. So how is that push and pull between bots and
Yeah. So the issue that's at the core of this is, can games be fun if they are played for real money, right? Like, that's one of the, because you obviously have some real money involvement in MMOs, in modern MMOs. And there's always been this kind of overlap, back even before World of Warcraft, like, people sold Asheron's Call accounts on eBay, right, for real money. And you had power leveling, and you had gold farming, you had all of this. Like, none of this is that new. It's been around for decades at this point. And there's a whole ecosystem around this. But the main, it sort of depends on the perspective that you want to take on this, because there is obviously some sort of involvement, real money involvement, that is beneficial to these games, because it heightens the incentive for players. It heightens the motivation, heightens the experience. In the same way, sports gambling does to a very limited extent. It heightens the experience of sports. The problem is when it starts to affect the core of the game. Like, that's when it can both be a business model problem for these studios, and it can be a problem to the players who engage in it, because there's this there's this famous game design maxim. I don't want to misattribute it, but I think it was Meyer who said that, the creator of the Civilization series, who said that if left to their own devices, players will maximize the fun out of the game. Like they will optimize the fun out of the game. And that is exactly what happens here. Even without the interested third parties, where you have people earning real money in the Philippines or wherever, Vietnam, China, doing gold farming because it's a much more economically viable activity for their earning level in their country than it would be for someone in a more developed economy. So that's essentially it. It's, do you take the view as a game developer and as a player that involving real money enhances the game or it undermines it? Because it can do both, and it does both. And the challenge for Blizzard and for pretty much any MMO company that has a game with real money involvement is, how do you profit from that without allowing it to undermine your game, right? And WoW Token was actually a really, really good implementation, and something that they've, Blizzard has been at the forefront of this from the beginning, and with Diablo 3 Auction House as well, where they tried to get real money involvement in there and to kind of get the secondary market for items out of control. And I think they learned a lot from that when they launched the WoW token. So I think it's really smartly designed, and it's then been taken up throughout the industry. I think every major MMO has a version of the WoW token now, where you get you can pay for that for the WoW token in real money and then convert it to game time or to gold. So that's a really good implementation, and I don't think you can eliminate sort of gray market activity completely, because it will still make sense to someone, but it's a very worthwhile goal, and it's very much it's crucial to protecting your product, because obviously if you have people third parties injecting gold into your ecosystem, you don't control your economy anymore. You can't really balance for the amount of gold that is coming in. All of the pricing will be out of whack. All of the drop rates, everything will need to be adjusted, and you don't really have the information you need to do that effectively.
I mean, yeah, that's why games like WoW, like especially Classic WoW, are so interesting because, like, yeah, when you have a bunch of botters going in and either farming materials or people are buying gold, on one hand, yeah, it's driving up the prices, creating loads of inflation, and then all of a sudden, it's very hard to get certain materials that then are needed for end game raid content, and then in turn, that forces players who want to be successful at game raid content to have to buy gold. So, like, I was watching someone I had on the podcast. He's a hardcore World of Warcraft raider called Ampi. And he was literally talking about how right now the game is basically, if you want to raid high level, you need to, and he's not advocating for this, but he's saying that a lot of people have to buy gold. And if you want to be able to kind of parse and have like the best metrics, like right now the game state is to play at the highest level, you need to get these potions, you need to get these flasks, you need to have this type of gear, you need to be able to do GDKPs. And it's such a conundrum because people obviously want to optimize and play at the highest level, like especially the ones that are most dedicated. And when the bar gets raised so highly because everything becomes so expensive, it's like a snake that eats its own tail. Like people want to over optimize, and then in order to over optimize, like some of those people end up buying gold, which then pushes the prices up, which then forces everyone else to buy more gold because they want to compete with everyone else because the bar gets raised. And it's yeah, I love how you said it. It's such a human problem. And of course, Blizzard's trying to confront it. And I think quite ignorantly on my side, when I saw the WoW token, I rolled my eyes. I'm like, like Blizzard's trying to make money by trading gold for real world cash. But when I started working at Old School RuneScape, I quickly realized, no, that's like a way to control the economy. Like that makes sense when I'd speak to colleagues and they'd explain to me, though, there's actually a delicate balance because if you leave it unchecked, it just spins out of control.
Yeah, and you can ban it, but that's a cost center for the company. Like you just have to hire people to constantly ban and monitor and do on the fly adjustments, and it's just might as well do it in a way that makes you money and sort of keeps costs down. Because at the end of the day, there is demand for it. So this is where I was trying to get to with Web3 when I was saying earlier that this is exactly the problem that Web3 game developers were trying to solve, but Blizzard did it better and they did it without crypto. So it's exactly this issue and why sort of Web3 gaming died, because the solution was not to make everything tokenized and to make everything tradable, which again is very um, dangerous to your economy, to your game's economy. But it's kind of isolating those tendencies into their own little piece of the game where they don't affect your core economy.
So I love how this is a segue to Web3. Like it really like talk to me about what was the core idea. Like you did mention it's about people having like a stake of ownership in an item. Like if I get a specific item, it's on the blockchain, right? Like it's
Yeah.
rather than it just being like a piece of code, I can track its ownership, I can track the money. It becomes like kind of like a, I don't want to say closed system, but how would you explain like Web3 for someone that is a gamer but never really uh took it into account? Because at the end of the day, you never really saw a proper Web3 game take off, like to the extent of like the Blizzards and the RuneScapes, etc.
Yeah.
Like, what is it, and then what happened? Yeah, I guess just to start
Right.
from the top.
So the Web3 games were the essentially the idea that you can take crypto tokens and bolt them to MMOs or to different types of game economies, and that would enhance the economy because you can have quote unquote true ownership of tokenized assets, like say an armor that you buy in the game and then you can keep and then you can sell to another player for real money, or you can, and this was one of the more out there ideas, that you can actually take that from one game and bring it into another game, right? And around 2021, there was a massive amount of enthusiasm around these ideas, and um, it wasn't completely off base in that there is a lot of demand for that, and it did come out of all these components of MMOs that did have some of that. RuneScape has item trading. There are games with secondary economies. Path of Exile has it. Escape from Tarkov has it, and I think these aren't really that visible to most players. I think they just kind of take them for granted, and they're just sort of there in the background. They don't really notice it that much, or maybe just the hardcore players have an understanding of it. But it's kind of they don't really connect it to Web3 games. Um, but what Web3 games wanted to do was take that sort of economic activity and bolt it to almost every game, and to essentially financialize most types of games. And the reason that didn't work was essentially the same reason as Diablo Auction House in Diablo 3 failed. And I formalized this in my True Ownership Trilemma, which essentially says that you need to pick 2 out of 3 things. So Web3 wants 3 things that you can't really have together from game assets, right? They want assets that don't go to zero, so that they keep their value, right? They want assets that have progression utility, in that they help you progress in the game, like they give you power, they affect the gameplay significantly. So not cosmetics, not right. So they want those 2 things, and they also want um, those items to be tradable on the secondary market.
Hmm.
And oh, they also want scale. They want these games to be mass market, to have a huge amount of players, millions, hundreds of millions of players, the way that World of Warcraft has, and the way that other successful mass market games have. And the reason you can't have that is exactly what happened with the Diablo auction house. And what usually happens with this type of implementation is that you make items available for sale. So let's say you have an auction house that players, they start playing and they put what they earn on the auction house, right? That's going to get flooded with items. Those items are going to be very, very cheap. And anyone who comes in to play, rather than earning those items, they will buy them off the auction house for a cent or 2 cents or whatever. They try to fight this by adding like a 25-cent minimum price. But it didn't really do much because it's not enough. You can't really get that price right. There's no sweet spot where you can say, all right, you just list those. You can't list for under this price, and people just stop buying them, and they will buy the next thing that is powerful enough at that price, right? So you'll just get to the point where a very powerful sword or very powerful armor is 25 cents and it's totally worth it, right? So they'll still keep going. They haven't really solved anything. So and it's still 25 cents. 25 cents is still not much money at all. And there's no, if you put it high enough that it's significant, like it will become a luxury good, right? Where it becomes pay to win, essentially. So you have a choice between things that nobody wants to buy or pay to win. Like that's the choice that that sort of mechanism creates for you in your game. So that's pretty much why the Diablo auction house kind of got stripped out, and it didn't work. And this is why they put in the WoW token instead, because that solves many more problems. First of all, the price fluctuates with the market. There is one thing, not many, and I don't think you can get a WoW token without paying. Like you have to buy it, right? And then you can convert it into what you want. And it's a liquid asset. It's not something that gets stuck with, like, it's not a sword that you get at level 10 and then by the time you're level 20 it's useless. It'll always be useful to you. You always need more game time. You always need more gold, right? You can always convert it into real cash. But it's not an amount of cash. Like you can't earn it in a way that makes that gold farming, right? You can't go and farm WoW tokens and take money out of the ecosystem, which again is something that kills these ecosystems. So yeah, I think that's I formalized that as the trilemma, and it's pretty much why the whole Web3 game industry just fell, just got destroyed essentially, because they don't understand this very, I mean, it's pretty obvious I get two responses when I tell this, when I explain this. One is, oh, it's so obvious. And my response to that is, and yet still people put billions of dollars, they lost billions of dollars because of not knowing this obvious thing or pretending that it's not real when it is. And the other is, oh yeah, that's genius. That is so smart. Like, how do people not see this? And it's like, well, they don't want to see it because they're incentivized to believe that, they can they can transform their game into something that people want. They're very hypnotized by the demand for this, because there is a demand, but it's naive demand, right? Players, they want to believe this, or some of them, they wanted to believe this fantasy that they can play a game and make money, or play a game and take all of their assets out of the game and put them in a different game when they're done with that game and just go play something else for free. But like, who in their right mind develops a game where you can just bring your stuff from Fortnite and not have to pay me for any of the skins in my game, right? Like, why would anyone do that?
Yeah.
So yeah, that's how that ended up. So, and that's why there was no successful Web3. I mean, you had these flashes in the pan, like CryptoKitties or whatever, but those are essentially like the pet rock like they had in the States, right? There's a craze for a while on Beanie Babies. There's a craze for a while. Everyone is gets into a frenzy, and then it all just falls off because there's no progression. There's no progression utility to those. You can't really, you don't buy CryptoKitty and then you use it to have an easier time in a World of Warcraft quest or something like that, right? So
I
yeah,
mean,
that's
you can't have object permanence in a game that scales, because at that point, that that makes so much sense to me, because then it's like, okay, I always question, why is there transmog in an MMO, right? The transmog is like, you can basically, you get an item and you can always wear it, and it can scale with your most powerful item, but like if you have a robe from like the Scarlet Monastery from level 30, you can keep that design of the robe, the aesthetics, but then you can kind of put the transmog over another piece of item with different attributes that are more scaled to your level and where you are. So you can keep the aesthetic, but the power, of course, scales with your character. And
yeah,
it just, and that makes sense to me. That clicked to me now, why transmog made sense for retail as the game evolved. Because it's like, okay, how do we value the fact that players go through all this time raiding and getting really powerful gear and really cool designs that are artist draw, and then as soon as the next expansion comes out, it gets discarded because it's basically useless. It's like, well, it's not
yeah,
useless. We can maintain the aesthetics of it, but so that's on the traditional kind of more MMO side. But then Web3, it makes so much sense that the dream is, oh, what if everything had value? What if everything can be traded? And then probably where all the Web3 people go nuts is like, okay, and every time there's a transaction, we take 1%.
yeah,
And then it's like
yeah.
infinite money, right? So then that's classically the greed that comes in. But
There was that, but there's also the gold farming. Like they wanna build in gold farming like at it as the core of the game, and it's no, you can't, because people will just strip mine your game and take all of the real money out of it if they can. Like it will essentially be like sweatshops where you get you get every single person that you can and pay them a little bit, pay them what you would pay in like a Bangladeshi garment factory, except that you pay them to extract money out of this game. And if someone's extracting money out of your game and then there's no limits to that, like that's your money as a developer, right? That they're extracting out of the game. So like there's no more liquidity in the game. How do you run the game? How do you pay your developers if someone's taking money out of your game, right? So that's games are centralized planned economies for a very good reason. And you can have a little bit of free market in there, but it really needs to be gated very carefully. And thank God for that, because like that's how I that's what I get paid for,
yeah.
right?
I think my last question, yeah, well, the penultimate is, I always talk about on the pod, like the Ready Player One future, but not the dystopian
Yeah,
one, like an actual, like, will there someday be, and I think with the advent of AI and the ability to create like virtual worlds through world models and just like agentic coding and like Unreal Engine 6 and 7 and 8, whatever comes soon. I dream of a world where like you can have all these different worlds stitched in together, and maybe one overall economy, even though it's crazy now talking to you now, it's such an insane problem to figure out. But what have you ever thought about what things can be in 10 to 15 years and what shape that could take?
yeah. I mean, how much time do you have? Like
I got time.
this
I
is
got time. How much time you got?
this is a multiple day conversation. But like, no, I know what you mean. I understand. Like I've read the book. I get the appeal. I get the why people want it. But first of all, this is very much a place kind of. So when I was working for that, like with that Web3 agency, we had clients that were banks, that were mall developers, that were kind of real world, not game people who wanted to buy into this future. And you had these promotional videos for these metaverse projects where characters could buy food for their avatars, or alcohol, like virtual alcohol, and the avatar will drink the virtual alcohol. And it's like I understand the seductive nature of that vision, but like that's a virtual alcohol. Like why would you like that's just a level of misunderstanding of kind of what the metaverse idea is and why it's successful. So I think, yeah, you can have a place with all of these different IPs, and I would argue, Fortnite is already that.
Yeah.
And its main virtue is that it's a place. It's somewhere where you go hang out with friends. Like, it's not coherent. It's not, you're not gonna go in and have like a full Lord of the Rings adventure and then go into the Spider-Man adventure, and then like that's gonna be its own coherent thing, but also coherent in the wider framework of all these things. It's just not it's not something that the main appeal of those individual things is that they are their own individual thing. And when you go inside a Spider-Man game, like, that's a Spider-Man game. That's the whole thing. There's no other, Lord of the Rings thing that you can go into, because then your brain goes into this mode of, oh, I'm in a candy shop now, and I'm just stuffing my face with candy, right? Whereas a five-star restaurant, they don't have a candy bar, right? They just have that experience. It's very curated. It's built in a very specific way to give you a certain type of experience, and then you can go to a candy shop afterwards, but it's a different thing. It's very separate, right? So, like, it doesn't. I don't think that makes sense as a fantasy, but not really as a consumer product, unless it's something like a mall where all of the experiences are stores. And there's something to be said for malls, but they don't really have, there's no, like, there's a reason why you don't put an opera in a mall, because you don't go to the opera to buy something, you go
Yeah.
to have a specific experience. So yeah, I don't think that's a viable future. I don't think it ever was. I think it's a nice fantasy. You can have different ways of interconnecting experiences, um, not necessarily economically, because then you go into stuff like having a certain currency of the store that all of the different experiences use. And again, that's something that not all experiences benefit from. So you don't really like, there was also this idea in Web3 games and Web3 cycles where Starbucks is a bank, for instance. They describe Starbucks as a bank because you could put money on your Starbucks card and it's there and you can't take it out, right? And there's this idea of, what if you tokenize that and then you can use your Starbucks money to buy Steam games or to buy Samsung phones, and it just defeats the purpose of having a loyalty card at all, because the loyalty card is for Starbucks, right? Why would Starbucks want you to use that money to buy, Samsung phones? So yeah, it's something that just completely undermines the structural integrity of the experience. Um, but where there is some sort of future in that, it's where you can have. I mean, this is way too speculative.
Please,
But
though, please. This is the space for it. I wanna know.
yeah, so there is a case to be made that you can have a game that is also a store of other games, right? You have these services, and I think Sony also bought one, and I think it's still going, where you have tournaments in multiplayer games that you get Amazon vouchers for if you win the tournament, right? And there are these sorts of meta experiences that you can build. Steam, they have these little meta games in their store as well when they do sales, right? And they have these currencies that you can earn to spend on cosmetics. So there's something to be said there. But it's just such a huge challenge of building those experiences in a way that keeps the coherence of the components while enriching it and not really interfering with it. That it's something that um like, yeah, I don't think it's going to be a mainstream thing. Like, I don't think it's going to be the main way you interact with buying games or Um, just yeah, it doesn't make sense to me. Like it can be sort of a nice complement, a nice sideshow that you can have. You know, I can imagine like an MMO where you go around the landscape, and when you reach a certain store, like you can buy only games from, like, the only place to buy games in the whole world is from that MMO store, and you have to go through quests to get to that. But it's, again, it would need to be such a custom experience. Like, you need to have someone like Nintendo do that, right? Where, and it wouldn't be a mass market thing at all. It would be kind of a premium luxury thing where only people who are super dedicated, they play the 10 hours to reach that store in that cave on that island, right? Where they've gone through many adventures to go there, and that's the only place they can get. It would be more like a Ferrari, experience where you have to buy kind of the cheap, crappy car, and then another, well, not crappy because it's a Ferrari, but like you have to buy the cheap model, like you have to buy five, and then be friends with a rep, and then you can buy the really cool car, right? And you have to have bought all the hats and the things before. So yeah, it's that can work, but not as a mass market experience. So that, I don't think, makes it the future of mass market game experiences.
I think what a lot of just to add quickly, like what a lot of people when I've spoken to streamers and players alike, everyone talks about having a world that exists and doesn't get reset, doesn't there isn't like a server shutdown. The online world doesn't get
Yeah,
lost. Like this idea of permanence, I think is so important, especially in MMOs, because I think that's what makes old school RuneScape such a fantastic game is that it's like circular, like it's evergreen. Like the time I'm putting in is valued and know I can come back in a year and I can still keep playing and I'm still going to have my power and my objectives and it's never ending. Like my co-founder hit 99 in woodworking and he was just like he was so happy and it was like I've been doing this for so long and it's just like it's such a beautiful thing when like your progress is there's always something to keep adding to your progress. And when I think to like Web3 and I think about like what a permanent MMO could be like, it's like imagine like not maybe an infinite world or like just an enormous world where people can set up cities and they can buy a house and that house is theirs and stays there. And like I always wonder like how you can create and then we went through this whole podcast, we went through all the issues, which is what happens
yeah,
when things go on for too long, which thanks to this conversation I'm way more informed about the difficulties of doing that. I can understand why all these like um land grab projects where like you could buy land for like some crypto and then
yeah.
those all inevitably failed. But I think the appeal is still there, that people want a place that feels like home. People want their their progression to be constant and valued forever. And yet maybe all that is a fallacy, but I
I
really
mean,
hope not.
I wouldn't say it's a fallacy. I just don't think it's a mass market thing. Like, I think when people think about games, they think about games with millions of players, right? Like it's inseparable from the idea of having a successful game. There's no like successful multiplayer game with 20 players where they each pay $10,000 a month to be there, right? And and this isn't to say it can't be done. Like, I've sort of built my career and my practice on the idea that we should be trying these models. But, what does that mean? Like, first of all, who's going to pay to develop that? And second, like, how do you do that in a space that's so commoditized? Like, how do you, when you have so many free games that are incredible to look at and they have all this incredible technology and it's all free, like, how do you come in and you convince someone to pay, this money and like give them something worthwhile for that money? And like, how do you then put this, like, how does the industry then regard this game as an experience that is worthwhile, right? Because with a painting, you can have someone film it and you can have pictures of it, put it on the website and go, okay, this incredibly important painting is $20 million, right? And people go, yeah, no, it's super important. It's 20 million, but it's super important, right? Even though they will never ever see it in person, they've seen a picture, they know it's important, like it's all cool. They're on board. But like, if you go, okay, well, this AAA game is $20 million, right? and it runs on a regular PlayStation that you and me have, but you can't have it. And I can show you a trailer of it, and you can see some, I don't know, some guy shooting people and driving a car. It's like, well, that kind of just looks like GTA, right? So, like, why is GTA $80 and this is $20 million? Like, it doesn't make sense because the technology of it is commoditized. The code isn't that expensive. Like, what's is there like an artistry to it that is worth the premium? Not really, because it still needs to be recognizable to everyone else looking at it, right? And in order to be recognizable, it needs to be pretty much the same type of technology they have that you have in normal games, right? So there's a whole slew of issues to solve there, because if you just go make a mass market game, you have 4 million players in it, and they all have a house. It's like, how do they how do you stack those houses? Are they just represented in real 3D space, and you have like one lot next to the other, and you walk there or you ride your dragon to that? It's like, well, there's going to be a huge amount of those. So then you need all of the stuff from real life. Like you need urbanism rules. You'll need like a city council. You need like, sorry, urban planners and all of that, and you'll need to have it be in a layout that makes sense. Or do you just teleport there, and then it's not really a city, it's just kind of a room that you can teleport to, and you don't get all of the benefits and dynamics of a city, of like walking around the streets or anything, right? Which kind of sell the fantasy. So these are the types of problems that you would need to solve for that. I'm not saying it's unsolvable. Like, I would love to jump on that. And even with AI, like, say, you build a world model and that is stable and it keeps consistent quality and all of those things that AI models can't do right now, right? Say maybe they will do. I think it's a very, very debatable question if they can get there, but say they do, right? That just solves the quantity. That just means you don't have to hand model every single tree and door and roof and whatever. It doesn't really solve the structural issue of how do you lay that out? How is it accessed? How are the property rights enforced? Like, how do I expand if I want to? um are there stores, what are the stores, all of that stuff. So those are the foundational issues, which I think you could solve if you had like a game with, I don't know, 100 players, and they all know each other, and they're all willing to pay, I don't know, 10,000 a month, right? To then you get a plot of land, and you have people building quests just for them, and it's a very exclusive country club sort of
Uh,
thing, right?
Oh my goodness, yes, that is. There's so many ways that games can evolve. That's what I think is the most exciting thing. Like,
Yeah,
and making the country club, it could be like of course, there's the mass market, which is kind of what everyone sees with Ready Player One. But I think you're grounding it in, it entirely depends, and we don't know how to predict this future. But yeah, sorry, did you want to add something else?
yeah, no, I'm just saying that might not be the correct answer. Maybe there is no correct answer, but like, you would need it to be small enough to experiment on, but expensive enough that it can sustain itself while you're experimenting. And you would need some sort of justification to charge that price. But then it could work, but like someone needs to build that into fund that. So it's not something that is easily sellable, easily fundable, because it's such a departure from what we traditionally think of as a game, right? So that's, yeah, it would need a tech component. It would need to, I don't know, come with some sort of full body VR thing where to justify the cost. Because if it just runs in a web browser, like, why am I paying $10,000 a month for a web game? Like, how good could that game really be? Like, right. So yeah, no, this is how I would approach that thing. But there are many possible, versions of this sort of solution to this sort of problem.
Yeah, no, you've definitely expanded my mind. I always talk about what the Ready Player One future could be, but now it's like, okay, it's so branchial, it's so fragment, like it can take so many different forms, and I really appreciate kind of your insight into like all the different models potentially and the problems that exist. I think this whole conversation has been incredible for that. I think last question would be, what kind of advice do you have for someone who's watching that wants to get into game design, wants to get into, maybe they love being an economist and they love the idea of like what you do, and what advice do you have for someone who to follow in the footsteps of getting to the industry?
Oh, yeah, those are multiple big questions there. So on the game economy side, I would say don't sweat the small stuff. I mean, I think there's a lot of obsession around, the data science aspect of it, the balancing, the tactics, the what tool do I use, how do I balance this particular aspect, or how do I model this? How do I, like, those are important, but they are not the most important. And now with AI, like, they are even less important because you can outsource some of that. You still have to check it. And I don't think we're at the stage where you can just, tell an agent or whatever, a chat interface, just make me a game economy, make no mistakes, right? But I think those aspects are increasingly being sort of commoditized, and they're much easier to manage. There is sort of less of an issue. Like, I think you still benefit from knowing Excel and from learning how to hand model things. But the more important aspect of it is, how does economy design, like, once you go past the obvious monetization aspects, once you go past designing offers and, store layout and all of that stuff, the progression curves and all of the stuff that is pretty much solved, and it's pretty much, in mobile at least, is very standardized. You have a certain list of features that you go through, and you're like, oh yeah, I need to have a daily login. I need to have, an event with its own store, and just all this battle pass, all of these features that are pretty much standardized now. So like all that stuff has been, I guess, pretty much a solved problem. I don't focus too much on it. What I would focus on is, how does game design integrate with economy design, right? Like, how, because it's in the game design side where you create demand. Right now, game economy side is very much about harnessing demand and optimizing and having all this, like, procedural pricing that captures like having an Uber algorithm sort of for prices to make sure you capture as much money as possible. But that's all, like, that's a pretty solved problem. Like, that's you're getting diminishing returns on that, and if the demand isn't there, there's nothing to optimize. And I think we are seeing drop in demand in mobile at the minute. There is a lot of stagnation. There's no real new games coming out. There's not a lot of innovation. And I think that's where the opportunity is for the future. Whether you do it in a studio, whether you do it as a full-time job or as a consultant or on your own product, like, that's where the opportunity is, figuring out what the new model is, because this is not the final form. Like, free to play is not the default model that's going to last forever. Premium is, but it's also going to be very constrained. Like, that market's not going to grow. So we need to figure out what the next model is, what the next business model is, and what the next sort of game design innovation that slots into that is, to create demand at a level that is sort of superior to what we have now.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Catalin,
hopefully.
so all great advice, and this has been a mind expansive conversation about game economics, design, Ready Player One. Thank you so much for everything, and for talking with me at length about this. And yeah, is there? I think I'll put in in the description the trilemma. I definitely want to put that article, so I'll ask you for the link. It'll be in the description below. People can read it.
The trilemma is on my website, and I also, well, it's a little bit paused now, but I will be coming back to it. My Substack newsletter, it's called Intrinsic Economies, and I write about the industry and the sort of future of game economics, as we've talked about it here. Yeah, thank you very much for having me and for the lovely conversation.
No, it's been a pleasure, Catalin. We'll do this again soon. Maybe when there is when we're getting closer to the Ready Player One, we'll pick this back up.
Yeah, for sure.